Welcome to Ask SQL Family podcast. This is episode number 14 and our guest today is Itzik Ben-Gan. So we did already the interview, the introduction, so you know what it be all about. I mean, in a nutshell. But would you like to introduce yourself to our listener? So, who are you? Where are you from?
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
Sure. So, well, first of all, I have a hard time answering where I'm from because I was born in Georgia. When I was 1 year old, my parents took me to Israel.
Yeah.
And then about 8 years ago, my wife and I and our two dogs, we moved to the US. So
you are very international right now.
If the question is where you live, it's in Redmond, Washington, in the Seattle area.
Mm-hmm.
And my name is Itzik Ben-Gan, but I guess you said it's in the introduction.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm with SolidQ. I'm one of the founders of the company. We started back in 2002. At the time, we were 6 people. And the thinking was, first of all, people who kept meeting each other, in conferences and events like this, and like each other and like working with each other. And we all like SQL. And we thought that together we could, join forces and try to cover more than one each of us could alone. And it worked quite well. So still part of the company. And my main focus is T-SQL. I did a lot of things related to databases. I started with them around the early 90s, 91 or so. But at some point I started focusing more on T-SQL and query tuning. So pretty much anything that has to do with the performance of the code. So internal structures, query plans, writing efficient code. It's not just about arranging the physical structure. You often have different ways to write the code that under different conditions each will tend to work better. So that's pretty much what I focus and I still like very much. So I think I'm fortunate in the way that I can do what I like. And not everyone can do this. Mm-hmm. So mostly teaching. So it's T-SQL and mostly teaching. That's pretty much what I focus on.
And do you like teaching, spending time with people? Because teaching can be pretty exhaustive because you have to spend like 2, 3, sometimes 5 days with the group, depending how long is the training.
Yeah, so teaching is what I really love to do. So all the rest I do just to actually enable the teaching. And I know that for different people, there's different things that they like doing and that make them happy. For me, that's this part. Actually, for me, it's much easier than anything else.
Okay.
I talk about what I like. I have people that like listening to it, which is also nice.
And that in that way, it's much easier, to do that.
And it's also the area that I like focusing on. So yes, I really love it. So
and how many books have you written? Because I have a lot of them, and we still have. There is a bookstore in the venue, and there are a lot of your books.
Yeah, the most popular, I think, T-SQL Queries, for example, that
windowing functions. The windowing functions is really my favorite one. It's not
actually
that
mine too, I have to say.
It's not that big, but it's very condensated and it's really.
And from my perspective, you also are focusing on these Windows functions. Very often I've seen that you are talking about that subject. Yeah. So
first of all, the number I believe it's around 10, 11, 12, something in that area. The window functions book specifically, also my favorite, I have to say. And the reason the topic is so interesting and that I focus on it so much is that the original intention behind adding it was a kind of specific type of calculation, which is data analysis, doing things like aggregates and so on, but in a more, I would say, sophisticated way, just very different way than using group queries, using subqueries, those kinds of things. It has some kind of, I would say, ingenious ideas about it. You group data, the grouping causes you to lose the detail.
That's right.
And often you need to mix when you do calculations like percent of the current value out of a group total and stuff like this. You don't want to lose the detailed information. And with subqueries, you get kind of an independent view of the data, whereas with windowing, you apply the logic after all of the query elements were already processed, not an independent view of the data. And that's usually what you want. So it's a more sophisticated tool, but I think what's interesting about it is that you can use it not just for the original types of problems it was designed to solve. That with time, that you work with it more, you discover that you can do much more generalized things. And it's as if nowadays you have these two kinds of problems in SQL. Not problems, I would say. They're for almost any kind of problem, I should say. There are two kinds of solutions. As if you have this fork. One is the classic predicate-based solutions that use subqueries, that use joins with predicates in the on-clause, where-clause, but often it's more complicated for people to think in those terms, and it turns out to be far more expensive in many cases in terms of how the SQL Server engine ends up optimizing. And you can find all kinds of creative ways to use window functions to solve those problems way more efficiently. So areas you would not expect to see them, temporal data, when you need to deal with intervals, doing techniques like packing intervals, finding a maximum number of concurrent intervals. You wouldn't think initially there's anything window functions have to do with it. So it's nowadays I think of problems typically as, do we solve it with the predicate approach or the window function approach? So it seems to people like a narrow area is much more general than people realize before they start using them. And that specific book, I wrote it back for 2012 when the major additions like the window frame was added, and the leg and lead and statistical functions, and they make it much more powerful. And I'm actually waiting for the next SQL Server version, what they call VNext now, and we don't know when it will be released, to update. That's the next book I want to update. But there's a very specific feature I'm waiting for in order to update the book.
Exactly. I wanted to ask if Microsoft extending those functions and
So the thing, they didn't extend the functionality. So since 2012, they didn't add new kinds, even though there are still a whole bunch of very, very interesting features in the SQL standard, and that you do see in some other platforms that were not yet implemented in SQL Server. But the 2016 version is when they added this new optimization of window function using this batch mode window aggregate operator.
Yes, that's right.
Exactly. That was huge difference.
It's an unbelievable difference in performance for the cases that satisfy the requirements for using it. But anyway, it's amazingly fast. It's just that it uses a batch mode kind of processing, where instead of processing one row at a time, it will process one chunk of rows at a time, a chunk of 900 rows. But currently, there is a condition in the engine that the batch processing can only be used if there's column store index present.
That's right.
Even if it could be very relevant if the data is pulled from a row store index. And in fact, if you're able to create a supporting index with a B-tree-based row store index, you could avoid the sorting that is necessary if you use the batch mode. If you use column store, that will then enable batch mode. So it's kind of, as if you either
operation.
So you either, if you have a regular column store index, you either need to pull it more compressed, but then sort it, and then have the window calculation done in batch mode, or pull it from row store, already pre-sorted, but then use the row mode. Well, apparently, if you create some kind of a column store index, even if it's not used, the optimizer can already enable the batch processing, despite the fact that it's actually pulling the data from row store, as long as the column store index is present.
So it's just like a trick or workaround.
Yes, it's just like a trick, but you can get to so many people and explain to them, look, now you can actually get it, but you have to create this index, even if it's a meaningless filtered index, but you need to do it. And many people will not hear about this or not know about this. So obviously it's better if in the engine they remove the connection between the presence of column store and the use of batch mode. And in the last PASS conference, Microsoft announced already a number of, they publicly announced a few things that they're planning in what they call VNext, and one of the things they were talking about was the removal of the dependency. So for all those systems, They will not need to use any tricks or create any special indexes. It will be kind of available out of the box, and I think it will be a huge performance difference.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without doing any
Absolutely.
code changes or creation of any objects. So
Yes, we don't
that's why
have to change the code, but they have to change, and that
Yeah.
might be complicated, I believe.
Yes.
It might not be a simple disconnection in code, but
Well, I mean, I
that
think
could be.
I think the reason they didn't make it available already, they knew obviously that ultimately the plan is to have batch processing not tied only to column store. They
That's right.
obviously had this in mind.
Okay.
But because inherently there's not supposed to be this strong connection. Yeah, it's kind of the arrangement of column store data lends itself to building batches, but no one says that pulling it from row store, building batches and getting all the benefits shouldn't really be an option. So I'm certain they had in mind this scenario for the long term, but they wanted to do regression tests and make sure that
Yes.
there are no all kinds of cases where the costing formulas are such that when it shouldn't really use the batch processing, it does use it. So I'm guessing they wanted a much more stable environment. And currently when we use this trick, it could be that there are here and there cases where it didn't make sense for the optimizer to use it, but it uses it. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm very much looking forward for the next version, because I think it will be a kind of a big performance boost with no need to create objects and no need to change the code for those queries using window functions and many others. I mean, it's just a basic group by and aggregate, where currently most of your workload doesn't really benefit from column store. But now those kinds of queries that do just basic aggregates, that do sorting, that do a lot of kinds of activities that just run much faster in batch mode, and many other improvements that they make. Almost anything new that they do in the optimizer, they invest mainly in batch processing, and either no investment at all in the row mode, or they do very little. So, if you want to enable those newer features, you need the removal of this connection in the engine.
Yeah.
That's right.
You probably heard of the adaptive query processing.
Yes, of course.
Capabilities. This is another good example, that if you take the adaptive join, where you have a situation where in some conditions the optimizer needs to use a loop join, typically when you have a small number of rows involved in a small table. If you have a larger number, it needs to use a hash join. But then you have those parameter sensitive queries where you use a parameter in the store procedure, and the first execution determines the kind of strategy it chooses and caches the plan, and now we're stuck with this one, even if there are many executions with values that would need the other plan.
Yes, and it seems to be a typical problem still.
Yeah,
A very popular problem with parameter sniffing.
Yeah, exactly, parameter sniffing.
So that's the
what people end up doing is they end up actually using a recompile option to force the system to create a new plan every time. And this very smart group of operators they added in 2017 called adaptive query processing. One of them has this kind of smart join where the outer branch is identical for both loop and hash, but there's one inner branch for the hash and another inner branch for the loop, and then it computes this threshold. And if the number of rows involved is below the threshold, it activates the hash branch. Actually, it's the loop branch below, and then on or above, it activates the hash branch. And then you don't have to force a recompile. So it is able to cache the plan with this more dynamic operator and activate the right branch during execution. The tricky part is, what does it need in order to activate it? Batch processing.
Yes, that's
So
right.
this is an operator that can only work under batch mode. So if you didn't have the column store index, it's not going to consider it.
Yes.
So you realize that this can only only makes sense, obviously, to remove the connection.
Yeah.
But it looks like for people who just write a query,
Yeah.
it's like it's a simple query. But as we discussed, they might know how complicated is the query optimizer and how many decisions it has to take every single query. So to optimize even a very simple statement.
Yeah, very simple, and at the beginning it looks like a very simple process, but internally it's very long, let's say, and very complicated. Yeah.
And it has to be fast. Good
Yeah.
enough, not the best one, good enough, but very, very fast. So the compilation is not longer than the query, actually. because it could looking for the very, very best plan forever. Yes.
This is interesting. What the point you mentioned, because they could add a lot more rules to the optimizer that don't require, let's say, too sophisticated additions. It's just that they would make the optimization process even longer and counterproductive. So a good example where people often fall into this kind of trap is with the search arguments.
Yes.
Where if you do some kind of manipulation, like there's this common one where the input for a procedure is a parameter, but where the values can be either non-nulls or sometimes the input could be null. Like give me the orders where the ship date is the specific one, but all orders that were not shipped yet will have a null ship date, and you want to support a null parameter. So in order for the filter to work, people often apply a calculation like is null on the parameter and the column and replace with something else that cannot appear in the data, but the same in both sides. And then you get the correct treatment, but you lose the searchability of the filter because you manipulate the column. So this example, or when you say give me the rows where the year of the date column is equal to some year, you lose the searchability, and then it does a full scan. And people often don't realize this. And then when you explain to them, well, you know that if you change it to not doing manipulation but with the same meaning, like column equals parameter, or column is null and parameter is null, it's a searchable kind of a filter, and it can use the index. And then they say, well, couldn't Microsoft add this to the optimizer and not us needing to do the rewrite? And they don't always realize that, they could, but then if you overwhelm the optimizer with too many rules, the optimization process, like you said, could become longer, and even longer than the query to run.
Yes.
So Microsoft
longer and more generic, and that could lead to the much more problems.
And Microsoft, I'm sure, intentionally didn't put it in the optimizer. Rather, they said if we can give it as a best practice to people, then we can pull all this logic out of the optimizer, and then people will just follow. Here's the pattern that is recommended to use when you write a filter. But it's true that but what I think is interesting in this kind of whole world is that both the optimization part is very kind of deep, and there are all kinds of levels you could go into. You have people like Paul White that know the optimizer to such levels that very few people in the world manage to reach. But then there are many other people that do get into some level, but decide at this point we stop. So there are different levels, and the same I can say about SQL itself. That you start working with it, you get kind of a false impression that it's an easy, simple kind of language. Probably a week into the process of learning SQL, you already have queries with joins and where and group by and so on, and you feel kind of very confident. And it's after 10 years that you start realizing, well, maybe I'm exaggerating with 10 years, but I'm saying the more you work with it, you realize there's a lot of depth there, and you can dedicate your life to this kind of topic.
The more queries you write, the more you see that it's not that easy. And when I start training with people in T-SQL, they are always like, it will be simple. What are we going to do for the next 3 days? It's just a select. And then we go deep and deep and deep, and it's not very deep level. And they see, it's not
and
that
more
easy.
Questions after 3 days, I guess.
We are going in the direction that the world, general world, I can say, works with more and more data. So that's why we have the column store indexes. That's why we should, at the beginning, focus from the more analytical point of view when we are looking at the data. So, do you think that you will in the nearest future more talking about the column store indexes because it's connected, like we said?
Well, first of all, for sure, column store index will play a big role in analytics, batch processing, specifically the optimization part, not just with column store. But this will be, I think, just a small part. But what you're completely right is that it's more and more data that's obvious to everyone. And by the way, there's this author called Yuval Noah Harari. Is a historian, teaches history in the university, and he wrote 2 books. One about Homo sapiens, and the other one he calls Homo Deus. So the first is just the way Homo sapiens kind of evolved, but the second one he talks about where he sees the future going. very, very kind of original type of thinking. So strongly recommended, but it talks about data as becoming kind of I know for some people it would sound a bit painful, but kind of a religion in a way.
Yes.
That everything is around data, more and more of our decisions are around data, and take data together with AI algorithms and so on. At some point, those algorithms will know humans better than we know ourselves, because they can capture a lot more data and process it than what we can do. They're pretty fascinating, but yeah, certainly that's what you see. It's more and more critical part of decision making. So we're in the right place.
Somewhere in the middle maybe, when we see a lot of data, but not that much of data. But if you think that maybe right now, I've seen a presentation when about big data. That in Twitter, in a minute, there are like 600 millions of tweets every minute.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is impressive. And every minute, so every day.
Yeah, if you want to following some special tags, hashtags, and if you put something like machine learning, but especially big data, it's a lot of messages every single second. So we can see a lot of your activities, not only in the USA, but also across the world, basically. So you are traveling a lot, yes. I remember that I met you something like,
I think it was London, no?
You was in London on the local group, so I was so surprised that I can see you on that kind of meeting, that kind of local meeting. But then we had occasion to chat each other. Very, very quick chat. So I know that you have some customers over there as well, because it's a big city. So could you tell us how often are you traveling to Europe or maybe to the other part of the world?
Well, I moved to the US 8 years ago. The main reason was because my work was mainly in the US, but ironically, as soon as I moved, I started getting a lot more work in Europe. But like I told you, I grew up in Israel. Now my base is in the US. I travel a lot. I think something like 70-80% of my time I'm traveling. Probably half of it is Europe, and half of it is US. But yeah, so for instance, next week I'm in Sweden, but I have Thursday flight home. I will spend 2 days at home. I will be back to Sweden. Then I will have a week in the US, and then I will have a week in Nuremberg in Germany. It's like this. But yeah, I don't like the flying part.
Absolutely.
But what
jet lag, etc.
If you told me you have to do something else that you like less, but you will stay always home, I prefer the way it is now. So at least I can know that I'm doing what I like doing. And
So when do you find time to write another book?
Well, the writing, first of all, the writing is not just the part of physically writing. You do it in your head all the time. So I work always with new ideas related to SQL, related to optimization, and I process them more in my head, and the writing part is more like kind of opening a drawer and pulling one of those things and maybe more polishing it. The writing part does add, because you force yourself to make sure that you have all the angles kind of covered and so on. So there is an important part of the writing process, but I usually do it every 2 hours a day. So usually before the working day or after the working day, I will have something like half an hour in the morning, and maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours in the evening. And it sounds like a little bit, but every day you do it for half a year, and there's a book. That's my process.
That's interesting that it works for you, because for most of the people it's hard to start something new or focus on something new. It takes time, at least a couple minutes.
So
for example,
for me, those are not new things. That's the thing. That there are things I'm working on all the time, but it's just a matter of putting them into the words and.
Maybe it's not new. I mean, different activities that during the day you just use previously.
So for me, the process works. I don't take vacation because I would normally need to take vacation if I wanted to just sit and write and do nothing else. So
That's what we do when we wrote one of our books. So we had 2 weeks, and during these 2 weeks we just wrote it. And it was a very intensive moment when you have
so for some people, I imagine that's a process. For me, it's every day a little bit.
But we were in a group, yes. There were 4 people, and we had to do it then, because it was very hard to synchronize all 4 people during the entire year. So we spent 2 weeks just writing a book. It was that's how it worked.
The next question must be about work-life balance, because I'm interested. Then, what is your approach to work-life balance? How you can manage that?
Well, my wife and I are very, very good friends, and we don't have kids. We have 2 dogs, so obviously it's easier.
So you already answer of our next question.
But yeah, so we are very, very good friends, and the fact that nowadays you have Skype and things like this, it makes it much easier. She used to travel with me years ago. It was fantastic, but now because our dogs are very, very old, they are 15 years old, so it's impossible even to take them on a car, or close to impossible, to put them in a kennel. So lately she stays with them, but every day we have Skype, we have WhatsApp and stuff like this. I sent you messages instead of my wife this morning. But yeah, so I mean, there are no special kind of challenges other than the fact that I'm away, and I would like to be with her and with the dogs. But we understand that this is part of life. And when we do get that's why, for instance, if I have 2 days between 2 projects in Europe, I will go back home, and not say, okay, I don't want to suffer the jet lag and so on, and then I would just stay in Europe.
Yeah, it would be easier just to move from here to Sweden, as you said, because it's like 2-hour flights. From Wroclaw. So.
But you see, if I was a lot at home, then of course would have made sense. But since a little time at home, then I will go back. Spend a couple of days at home, go back. Maybe I will not change my watch. Maybe I will keep my watch on Europe time, and be in the US, but stay in Europe time, and then I will not need to go through a jet lag. We'll see.
Maybe that would be the trick.
Yes.
So if you would describe your most activities or general activities, what it would be? I mean, there's we already know that it's a lot of trainings.
Yes.
But I think you are writing some white papers for Microsoft.
So yeah, there were a few papers I wrote in the past, but I maintain a column for close to 20 years now. And recently, by the way, I switched the column to SQLPerformance.com. This is, the SQL,
like last
the
week
Century
is
one.
Like last week you posted, I think, the last article.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so I just started working with them a couple of months ago. So just my monthly column is now going to be in the Century One website. I really like both the company and the group, so being part of people like Paul White and Aaron and so on, who also regularly write there, is really amazing. So yeah, but yeah, I write a monthly column, and by the way, for many people who kind of look for ways to enhance their knowledge and so on, sometimes you pick a topic that you're working on and you're writing on it, but sometimes when you know that you have every month a certain column that you need to deliver, you keep processing in your mind all kinds of ideas, like even it could be a customer, could be a student that presents some kind of a question or an idea, and in your mind you already know. You need to research this further, and it becomes an article. So during this process, you get to learn a lot.
Yes,
So for people who look for ways to expand their kind of knowledge and keep always fresh, then maintaining a monthly column is a fantastic way. So you just don't want to be, you don't want to burn yourself. So you don't want to try, I'll write 2 blog entries every week.
Yeah.
And then, okay, you do it for maybe a couple of months, and then
Yes.
it's just impossible for you to continue to produce good quality and deep enough topics. and
let's
be on
start
top of
from
things.
something frequent, but like one month.
I think it's better to just ahead to decide on something more realistic that you can keep in the long run. So I'm running it since '99, this column, you know. And and looking back, what are the things that for me kind of contributed to the knowledge? One is the column, another is participating in forums, all kinds of what back then was news groups and so on, where you have just exposure to lots of different questions on one hand from different kind of areas, and also other people's ideas. So there is a thread, someone asks, how do I handle this situation, and then one person will you first of all want to work on the task yourself without looking at other people's solutions, but then you come up with one idea, then you look at other people's ideas, and you get exposed to a lot of information, and techniques and ideas.
Yeah.
So
in which forum we can find you?
Well, nowadays actually I do less forums. I'm saying the beginning, how I started getting a lot of the ideas. It used to be the news groups, NNTP news groups. If you remember them, they were so nice. There are currently MSDN forums. There are the
Stack Overflow.
Stack Overflow. Nowadays I do less, and I really wish I did more of this. Even now, But I'm thinking back where I gained a lot of the knowledge. It was those things. The column I still maintain, of course, like I said every month.
So apart of white papers, books, and trainings, do you work for some specific customers or specific projects?
Well, first of all, as a company, I said I'm with SolidQ. The company does a lot more customer work than the training part. It's more my personal favorite thing. So as much as I can control it, when they ask me what do you want to do, I tell them I prefer much more training. As a company, a lot more customer facing and the field work, some small projects like there's a query tuning problem or some performance problem, and some very big projects designing their whole systems and so on. But yeah, we have customers, it's literally all over the globe. And nowadays it's a big company with about 200 people. We have some, regular customers, some new customers that are coming all the time. But so it's in all fields. I don't want to name just one, but finances, health, government related, pretty much everywhere.
And what do you like to do apart from T-SQL and working? Like hiking?
Yeah, so I love hiking. I love friends. This is one of the reasons why it's so nice to have those conferences. Even though I don't do many conferences, but when people walk in a specific place, they meet their colleagues every day. For me, I'm traveling all the time. I mainly see the students, but it's every week a different group. But in those conferences, I can meet people that I know and catch up and so on. So, but hiking, I love hiking. So we have every year we usually have this kind of long hike. Usually in the summer, something like a whole week in the backcountry, and it's a group somehow that got connected through SQL. You probably know Lubor Kolar.
Yes.
Lubor Kolar is now retired, but he was
yes.
Responsible for many very big important features in SQL Server, like partitioning. And
I was fortunate to meet him like 10 years ago, and I think it was a PASS conference in Düsseldorf. He was there. It was one of his last, let's say, appearance on this. And that now I see on Facebook. He's retired for some years. He's with kids, but he's still very, very active. Many pics taken from the mountains. So.
Right. So he started the idea. I think it was 2006. He started this idea of let's go do some interesting long hike, and we did a segment of what's called the Pacific Crest Trail. This is a very long trail that starts in Mexico and goes to Canada. We did a small piece of it. It was something like 70 miles, I think, something like this. But since then, every year, we have this group that does a hike, sometime in Europe, sometimes in the US. So one year we did in Ireland. There's a beautiful hike called the Kerryway. It has this kind of shape like 8, but 110 kilometers. And so I love this. And we call it SQL hike because
it's SQL hike.
It's mostly, I mean, here and there we have people not from the SQL world, but it just happened to, because
that's because of our work.
Our work, we meet each other. That's how we make our friends. So, Yeah, with Boris Baryshnikov, maybe you know him. He also did a number of important things in SQL, like resource governor. He was responsible for the feature and so on. Yeah.
And
so
Dayan
Sarka, Herbert Albert. Yeah.
Do you need to specially prepare yourself for the speeches, for example, if you are speaking on some conferences?
So usually you just want to have the first couple of sentences. You want them ready, but I don't do this a lot of time ahead. So like before we start, maybe a couple of minutes before the session needs to start, you want to make sure that you have like a couple of sentences ready, you know. But then nothing special, you know, nothing special. It kind of flows.
It flows.
Yeah, and for me, because I'm much more interested in the code part than you know, slides and those things, and I do this regularly all the time. It's a kind of a very natural process. It's easier for me, for instance, to start showing queries than to speak in English. You know,
no.
So
the query language is easier.
The query language is much easier for me. So because my brain is thinking in such patterns, you know, the English part is still very hard for me because it's not my native language. But the SQL part is because my brain is all day, all night and day,
working around,
all time,
thinking in SQL terms. Then it's kind of natural, you know. And also for people, I think it's much better when they see the code developing. As opposed to if you just show a piece of code on a slide or just highlight a piece of code in a script and run it, because then it's very hard for them to see how how it evolved, you know. So if I write the queries and explain the thinking during the writing part, then I think it gets absorbed much better. And also when they will work on the technique themselves, I hope they will think in kind of in such terms, you know. Start thinking about the from clause, what are the tables involved, what do you join, the where, the group by the having, the select, and so on. Yeah.
So how have you started with conferences? When was your first conference?
First conference, I believe it was maybe PASS. I think it's maybe PASS early 2000, maybe in 2. This was like the first big conference, but there were before through the MVP, what used to be called the SQL Server MVPs, and now is the Microsoft Data Platform MVPs. There were summits, and we still have those with Microsoft. So, but those are internal conferences where Microsoft mainly provides information about future plans and stuff like this. But as a speaker, I think the beginning was maybe 2002.
Do you remember your first
Summit.
conference? PASS Summit. It was PASS Summit. Okay.
Oh, I will never forget it. That's for sure, because I had the very big stage fright, you know, at the beginning, and the first conference, I was supposed to give a lecture. I didn't know originally, but when I checked the agenda and looked at the kind of organization of the rooms, my lecture was supposed to be in what they called Ballroom 6C. And compared to all the other rooms that look like small squares in the picture, this took like almost the whole page. And I realized there's going to be like something like 500 people there. And you know that the fear of public speaking is a big fear for many people. And for me, it was like this. And I just, and I came from Israel, so I was first jet lagged. And with the excitement around, I'm going to speak to so many people, I didn't sleep for 3 days. And I tried all kinds of things. I just literally didn't sleep for 3 days.
Wow.
And then when I was supposed to give the lecture, I just went to, it was in a hotel, I went to the hotel, I asked for a bucket, and I went fill it with ice, and I filled this sink with the ice and water, and I put my head inside. Then I took a quadruple coffee from a Starbucks, and then I started the lecture.
Wow.
So it went quite well, amazingly, but
at least for the 1 hour, that you needed.
I was not concerned at all about the topic or being able to show interesting stuff, or the demos will not work. My concern was more to be able to start to speak, you know, to be able to breathe and not get excited.
Yeah.
But yeah, since then, it became easier and easier, and I still get very excited when I speak, but it's now kind of a healthy type where it keeps your adrenaline up and so on.
That's right.
So do you still feel some stress, or
Yes,
totally not?
certainly I still feel, but I'm saying I feel that it's now a healthy kind of stress. That, if you have less of it and you start becoming indifferent or something, you would have a different type of lecture, and the quality would be lower quality. So I think it's now at a good level. But yeah, it's 20 years after, you know.
So now you don't need to bring the ice and put it to the sink.
Now I don't need ice. Still coffee, but no,
the ice part is no longer needed.
It was funny though.
So with which version of SQL Server did you start working?
I started with 6.5. This was my first.
Sorry, which one?
6.5.
6.5.
Yeah.
So it's 90 something, yes, 1990.
Yeah, this was the very early 90s. Yeah, exactly.
So you have the.
Well, actually, wait a minute. Early 90s, it was still other database platforms. So it's more mid 90s towards the late 90s with the 6.5. You're right. So back then I was working with in this big beer factory, and the database was a DB2 database in AS400, and also I pulled often data from AS400 into kind of Access database, and did a lot of financial analysis, costing, sales analysis, those kinds of things. And by the way, back then I used to do a lot more kind of all-up work, and I used the original product that Microsoft then acquired to create what nowadays is analysis services in SQL Data Warehouse. So back then it's a company called Panorama, an Israeli company, that developed this cube engine and also the viewer that they had. And in that company we used their product. So I created cubes based on, my first cube was beer related cube. And then Microsoft did an acquisition of the engine, so that company kept developing the viewer. They still own the viewer, but the engine became first all-up services, and then later they made it analysis services.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that's interesting part of it.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, when I left the job, they still, there was, there's the drink party, we call it a drink party, where, you say goodbye to everyone, and they bring your presents and so on. And then my boss told me, but I need another cube, just before I left, after we already drank and said hello, but I really need this one more cube. So I sat down and I had to create another cube before I left.
That's great.
Interesting.
I have one more question about, do you have any advice to people who would like to start, I don't know, on the conferences, and they just fear about how to start talking, how should I prepare?
Yeah, so, it's hard to say, because I guess it's a bit different for different people, but what I would say is that it's an important part if you want to get the exposure. For me, for instance, I prefer the classroom setup than the conference, but in order to get people in my classes, the way I create the exposure is the public speaking, the writing, and so on. And they're all healthy parts of the whole kind of situation that you have. So I would say just get over your fear, pick a topic that you're very comfortable with, and just do it. It's maybe to try and do things like what I mentioned, to try and at least tell yourself the first couple of sentences before you start, picking a topic that you really like, because after you get over the first couple of minutes of excitement, then it becomes just a more natural thing. So do it. I would say, if you're planning to become part of this community and you want to be able to, especially if you're independent, if you're working in a certain job, you don't need the exposure so much. But if you're independent, you're consulting or you're teaching and so on, you need to get your customers, and that's a great way to do this.
And how important is the community? Do you think it's important?
I think it's. I think first of all, the SQL community is a very a very lively kind of community, and it's a big part of your knowledge. So, first of all, you meet each other, you make friendships, you make connections. But then a lot of times when you sit and chat, some of it is just jokes, but some of it is ideas. So you don't always get your SQL ideas from a customer or from a student. Sometimes it's just the colleagues that discuss, hey, I worked on this thing and I faced this challenge. So and definitely that's a way to get to know other people and to get exposed to other ideas. And our reality is that work is such a central part of our lives. Then for many of us, we make our friends through this kind of environment. So
that's right.
I think the community, both the community and you look at the teams that develop the product, and it's a very open kind of group.
For the new ideas? Or?
No, I'm saying that the SQL Server developers, development team, the Tiger team, the customer advisory team, they're very, very open. They see the importance of the community and the interaction with them. They're very accessible. We meet them in conferences, we chat with them. Obviously, they will not tell you every single thing they're planning. The next
because maybe they can't.
They simply can't. But still, what they can talk about are very, very open, very friendly. So I see it as a very positive kind of community and part of our work.
Currently, everything is going to the Azure, basically, and in the next couple, maybe several years, there will be more and more systems and data pushing to the cloud. So how do you think it's from your perspective or from the perspective of people who's working with performance? That it's important part. I mean, all those people lose their job or maybe lose the contract?
Not at all. I mean,
customers.
The way I see it is just like nowadays. Do you worry about the electricity that you're using for your laptop or something like this? Historically, people used their own kind of devices to create the energy, but at some point it just doesn't make any more sense. So you just plug into the socket in the wall and you don't think too much about the electricity. So I mean, in a similar way, I guess the cloud will be where things will be running and where the data will be stored. But then again, you will connect to your database, and nowadays it's already like this. If you connect with your SQL Server Management Studio, does it feel any different when you connect to a cloud or when you connect to the box product? Not really. And the way I write queries is the same. The way I tune them is the same. The indexing,
but
the query plans.
From the perspective that
you just don't need to worry about patching. You don't need to worry about many of the things that are related to the hardware itself.
And a lot more possibilities, because you can connect, let's say, the bricks together. You have a block like SQL, you have analytics block, you have reporting blocks, whatever, machine learning blocks, and you can build
so
very good solutions.
I mean, I don't see it. Of course, the people that were very, very focused on hardware, for instance, they have less, relevance when the product is in the cloud. But for people who deal with the actual code or
from the design perspective, it will be the same. But I mean, in the cloud, there's more automated things like performance, like from Query Store, and AI would be engaged in this. So I mean, probably it would be less work from the performance tuning. Maybe
well, from one aspect of performance tuning. So again, the hardware tuning is not relevant anymore, but index tuning, for instance, does really change. Right, so
it's different environments, so different patterns maybe, and different things to look at.
So for me at least, being focused on T-SQL and query tuning, I don't see any difference really. What I like actually about the cloud, even though many companies today still don't use the cloud, and maybe it will happen quickly or not, how they will transition, if they will transition. But for me, the interesting part about the cloud is that now Microsoft first of all, the code base for SQL Server and the SQL database is the same code base. It's just that every so often they freeze a build and release it as a box product. But they get a lot more feedback compared to when there was no cloud involved. They have literally millions of databases. They get a lot of telemetry information. The feedback cycle, both in terms of seeing what is used more, what is used less, and what are the problems. Then they manage to deal with those in a much more efficient way, and this results in a much better box product. You know, because all of the experience they're having from the cloud, we end up enjoying from a better box product as well.
Yes.
And also you start seeing features being released much more frequently, and they usually appear first in the cloud and later in the box product. So even for the purposes of being able to play with a feature and to learn about it, it's convenient to have access, you know, to the cloud. So yeah, I see it as having a positive result, even for people who don't use it. And you know, I keep surveying. Like when I teach, I check with people how many are using cloud, and I get from maybe 12 people, one is using the cloud. It could change. So it's very likely it will change, but I'm saying
it will change for
even if the majority now don't use it, they enjoy from it, whether they know it or realize it or not. They do gain benefits from it. And eventually I will see it, I see it as a service that you won't need to think about too much. The problem I see nowadays is that there's a lot of focus that the companies who provide the technology put on the cloud, obviously because they want customers to move to the cloud. But the way I see it is kind of inevitable. And the point where it will be really we will be completely there is when we will stop talking about it. Is when we will be in the cloud, but we won't need to think about it. Just like we don't keep talking about electricity today, even though we use it all the time.
It will be so natural, yes?
Yeah,
the cloud is just there.
And you will just focus on the technology and not on the infrastructure behind it. That's the day when we will really be there. As long as you keep hearing companies talking about the cloud, probably we're not there yet, because they're trying to get customers to move to the cloud. That's why they are talking about it so much.
We are in transition somewhere at some point, yes? Some companies still are on premises, but more companies are now trying to think about what can we and how can we benefit.
Yeah, and this process is ongoing.
Yes.
Okay, Itzik, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me here in the conference, really enjoying it.
Yes, people are really amazed about your sessions. So, and my colleague, which I work on the university, told me that he is literally hypnotized.
Really?
Really?
And he had a so positive push and kick to learn something new. He was not aware about that. This is so fascinating. That a query can be so fascinating. So it was really amazing. So people are really thankful for this workshop and the lecture, and they still have one.
Yeah, because there's one left today.
Yes.
At the end, because I forgot, tell us where we can find you in the internet, for example.
Yeah, so first of all, like I said, I'm with SolidQ. So if you go to solidq.com, you can see our company and my personal stuff, like the book related content and T-SQL related resources that I maintain. I have a personal website that uses the same domain, just starts with tsql.solidq.com instead of the www. solidq.com. So, and on Twitter at Itzik Ben-Gan. Every time there's a new article or book, I will usually send a tweet.
And of course SQL Performance right now, yes? The
SQL Performance, like I said, is the blog. So now it's a monthly column basically. I don't think of it as a blog. I started writing it before the term blog really existed. Nowadays you call them blog. So it's the monthly column. Every month there's a new idea, usually related to advanced SQL or query tuning topics. And if anyone really wants deep knowledge about T-SQL, then I run regular 5-day classes. So they can just look up in the T-SQL SolidQ.com website. Under the courses section there's a schedule where I am in the upcoming weeks, and 5 days of just T-SQL and query tuning content.
They can join, to the class.
Yeah.
Great, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, once again, thank you very much, Itzik.
Again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, listening this podcast, and time spent jointly.
You can find this podcast on website sqlplayer.net.
Share this episode if you like it, and let us know if you want to hear a specific person from SQL community or maybe about interesting topic or technology.